In ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius Decimus, a legendary gladiator who lost his wife and young son to a plague while he was forced to fight in the arena, has just won his freedom after 10 years of bloodshed. Broken and purposeless, he encounters Gaius, a wealthy merchant whose life he once saved in the arena. Gaius, believing he can repay his debt and heal Marcus's wounds, offers his spirited daughter, Livia, as a bride. What begins as an arrangement born of gratitude slowly transforms into a profound journey of healing, redemption, and unexpected love, culminating in a heart-wrenching choice between vengeance and forgiveness that will forever change their lives. The roar of 50,000 Romans shook the very stones of the Colosseum as Marcus Aurelius Decimus stood in the center of the blood-soaked sand, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The African lion lay dead at his feet, its massive form still twitching in the throes of death. Around him, the bodies of 3 other gladiators sprawled in grotesque positions, their blood mixing with the sand to create dark, muddy pools that reflected the merciless afternoon sun. Libertas! 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 The crowd chanted in unison, their voices rising like thunder. Marcus raised his gladius high, the blade catching the light, sending golden reflections across the arena. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had witnessed a decade of death, remained empty, devoid of the triumph that should have accompanied this moment. 10 years since that cursed morning when the guards had dragged him from his burning home. 10 years since he'd held his wife Julia's fevered body. 10 years since he'd watched his 5-year-old son Quintus take his last labored breath. Emperor Commodus rose from his seat, his purple toga billowing in the wind. The crowd fell silent, anticipating the moment they'd all come to witness. The emperor extended his hand, thumb sideways, then slowly, deliberately turned it upward. Marcus Aurelius Decimus, Commodus's voice echoed across the arena. You have earned what few men achieve, your freedom. Go forth a free citizen of Rome. The crowd erupted. Rose petals rained down like snow, covering the blood and gore with a mockery of beauty. Marcus dropped to one knee, not in gratitude, but because his legs suddenly couldn't bear the weight of his freedom. What was freedom to a man who had nothing left to live for? As the guards approached with the wooden sword, the rudis that symbolized his liberation, Marcus's mind drifted to that final night with Julia. She'd been burning with fever, the plague eating away at her from within. Promise me, she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above Quintus's whimpering. Promise me you'll live, not just survive, live, he'd promised. But the men who'd come for him at dawn hadn't cared about promise. They'd needed strong men for the arena, and Marcus, a former soldier of the 9th Legion, had fit their requirements perfectly. They'd left Julia and Quintus to die alone while they dragged him to his new life of sanctioned murder. Rise, Freeman, the arena master commanded, pressing the rudis into Marcus's calloused hands. Marcus stood slowly, mechanically. The wooden sword felt alien in his grip. Too light, too symbolic, too useless. The crowd's cheers became a distant hum as he walked toward the gate of life, each step taking him further from the only world he'd known for a decade. Outside the arena, the real world assaulted his senses, the smell of bread from nearby bakeries, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the casual conversations of free people going about their daily lives. It all felt like a cruel joke. He stood there still in his gladiator's subligaculum and blood-stained leather bands, looking like a warrior ghost, lost in the land of the living. Marcus, by the gods, Marcus. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. A well-dressed man in his 50s rushed toward him, followed by several slaves and guards. The man's face was vaguely familiar, but Marcus's mind, trained to remember only threats and combat techniques, struggled to place it. You don't remember me, the man said, stopping a respectful distance away. His eyes were bright with emotion, tears threatening to spill. I'm Gaius Lucianus. 3 years ago, in the arena, you saved my life. The memory surfaced slowly. A special event, condemned criminals thrown to the beasts, but one man claiming innocence, saying he'd been falsely accused by a business rival. Marcus had been ordered to ensure the lions did their work, but something in the man's eyes, the way he'd looked at a young girl in the patrician seats and mouthed, "I love you, my daughter," it had stirred something human in Marcus. He'd killed the lion before it could reach Gaius, claiming it had been attacking him instead. The crowd, always hungry for unexpected drama, had loved it. Gaius had been spared. "You were pardoned," Marcus said. His voice rose from disuse. He rarely spoke in the arena beyond the necessary communications with other gladiators. "Because of you," Gaius said, tears now flowing freely. "You saved me, and I've spent 3 years trying to find a way to repay you. I've watched every match, praying for your survival, hoping for this day." He gestured to the rubies in Marcus's hand. "And now you're free. Please, come with me. Let me help you start your new life." Marcus almost refused. The urge to walk away, to disappear into the labyrinthine streets of Rome and fade into nothingness, was strong, but he had nowhere to go. No home, no family, no purpose. And Gaius's eyes held genuine gratitude, a human emotion Marcus had almost forgotten existed. "I have nothing," Marcus said simply. "Then you have everything to gain," Gaius replied. "Come, my home is yours for as long as you need it." The ride to Gaius's villa was surreal. Marcus sat in the cushioned litter, feeling the soft fabric against his scarred skin, watching the city pass by through silk curtains. Free citizens nodded respectfully to Gaius's entourage, completely unaware that among them sat a man who'd killed dozens for their entertainment. The villa was modest by patrician standards, but seemed like a palace to Marcus. Situated on the Aventine Hill, it commanded a view of the Tiber River. Gardens bloomed with roses and jasmine, fountains tinkled peacefully, and slaves moved about their duties with an ease that spoke of a kind master. "The bathhouse is through there," Gaius said, noting Marcus's self-conscious glance at his blood-stained appearance. "I'll have fresh clothes brought tonight. We feast in honor of your freedom." The bathhouse was empty, a private sanctuary of marble and steam. Marcus sank into the caldarium, the hot water stinging cuts he'd forgotten he had. He scrubbed mechanically, watching the water turn pink, then red, then pink again as layers of blood, sweat and sand washed away. But no amount of scrubbing could clean the stains on his soul. When he emerged, he found a toga waiting, the garment of a Roman citizen. His hands shook as he dressed. The last time he'd worn a toga, Julia had helped him arrange the folds, laughing at his complaints about impractical civilian clothing. "You're not a soldier anymore," she'd teased. "You're a husband and father now. Try to look the part." He'd failed at both roles. A knock interrupted his dark thoughts. "Dominus requests your presence in the triclinium," a slave girl said softly. The dining room was already set for the evening meal. Gaius reclined on a couch, and him sat a young woman who could only be his daughter. She was perhaps 20 summers, with dark hair arranged in the elaborate style, favored by patrician women, but it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. Intelligent, assessing, unafraid. "Marcus," Gaius rose, smiling. "May I present my daughter Livia?" The young woman inclined her head gracefully. "The famous Marcus Aurelius. Father has spoken of little else for 3 years. I'm no one famous," Marcus said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just a man who was good at not dying, and at saving others from dying," Livia countered. "That makes you rather unique in the arena." Something in her tone, not quite mockery, but a challenge perhaps, made Marcus look at her more closely. There was a strength in her bearing that reminded him of Julia, though they looked nothing alike. Julia had been fair where Livia was dark, gentle where Livia seemed fierce. "Livia manages my household," Gaius said proudly. "Has done since her mother passed 5 years ago. She has a better head for numbers than most of my accountants." "Father exaggerates," Livia said, but her smile showed pleasure at the praise. The meal progressed with surprising ease. Gaius was a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of his trading ventures, silk from the East, wine from Gaul, grain from Egypt. Livia occasionally corrected his numbers or added details he'd forgotten, their easy banter speaking of deep affection. Naras found himself relaxing incrementally. The wine was good, the food plentiful, and for brief moments he could almost pretend he was just a normal dinner guest, not a killer fresh from the sand. "You must be wondering about your future," Gaius said as the second course was served. "I have contacts throughout the city. What profession interests you? Security for a noble house? Training for the urban cohorts? Or perhaps something completely different? I know merchants always looking for reliable men. Maris paused, realizing he'd given no thought to the future. For 10 years, his only goal had been surviving the next fight. "I don't know. There's no rush," Gaius assured him. "Take time to adjust. Freedom is its own challenge after so long." "Father speaks from experience," Livia said quietly. "Those months after his false imprisonment were difficult." Gaius's face darkened. "My rival thought he'd won. Destroyed my reputation, seized my contracts, turned friends against me. If not for Livia's cleverness in hiding part of our wealth, we'd have lost everything." "You rebuilt," Marcus observed. "With help," Gaius said, looking at his daughter with pride. "Livia negotiated with creditors, managed what resources we had, even discovered evidence that eventually exposed my rival's lies. By the time I was pardoned, she'd saved our family from ruin." "Father gives me too much credit," Livia protested. "I give you exactly the credit you deserve," Gaius said firmly. Then, turning to Marcus with an expression that had suddenly become serious, "Which brings me to something I've been thinking about for these 3 years." Marcus tensed, recognizing the shift in atmosphere. In the arena, such changes usually preceded violence. "You saved my life," Gaius continued. "By every law of honor, I owe you a debt that can never truly be repaid. But I've thought of a way to try." "You owe me nothing," Marcus said quickly. "You've already done more than enough." "I heard you lost your family, Gladiator," Gaius interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "A wife and son to the plague. 10 years ago." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His hand clenched around his wine cup so tightly the metal bent. "How?" he managed. "I made inquiries," Gaius admitted. "I wanted to know about the man who saved me. I'm sorry for your loss. No man should endure what you have." "Father," Livia said warningly, apparently sensing where this was heading. But Gaius pressed on. "You're alone, Marcus. No family, no connections, no one to build a future with. And I have the greatest treasure any father could possess. A daughter worth more than all the gold in the empire." "Father." "No," Livia said sharply. "My daughter," Gaius continued, ignoring her protest, "will be perfect for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at Gaius in shock, then at Livia, whose face had flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You can't be serious," Marcus said finally. "I'm completely serious," Gaius replied. "Livia is 23, well past the usual age for marriage. She's refused every suitor I've suggested, claiming none were worthy. Well, I can think of no one worthier than the man who saved my life." "Father, stop this immediately." Livia stood, her composure cracking. "I'm not a prize to be awarded." "Of course not," Gaius said. "You're my daughter, and I want to see you protected and cared for." "Marcus is an honorable man, who I met an hour ago," Livia exclaimed. "This is madness." Marcus stood as well, the toga suddenly feeling like chains. "Gaius, I'm grateful for your hospitality, but this, I can't. I'm broken. I have nothing to offer anyone, least of all your daughter." "You have everything," Gaius insisted. "Strength, honor, courage." "I have nightmares that wake me screaming," Marcus interrupted harshly. "I have hands that know only how to kill. I have a soul so stained with blood that I can't remember what peace feels like. That's what I have to offer." The raw honesty silenced even Gaius. Livia was looking at Marcus with an unreadable expression, her anger seeming to have transformed into something else. "I should go," Marcus said into the silence. "Thank you for—" "No," Livia said suddenly. Both men turned to her in surprise. She was studying Marcus with those intelligent eyes, seeming to see past his scars to something deeper. "Don't go, not yet, Livia," Gaius said hopefully. She held up a hand to silence her father, still looking at Marcus. "You speak of being broken as if it's permanent, as if my father wasn't broken when he came home from false imprisonment, as if I wasn't broken when my mother died, as if breaking means ending." "It's not the same," Marcus said. "Isn't it?" Livia challenged. "You think you're the only one who's lost everything, the only one who's had to rebuild from ashes?" She moved closer, and Marcus could see the steel in her spine, the survivor's strength he'd recognized earlier. "My father offers me like a prize because he doesn't know what else to do. He sees his debt to you, and my unmarried state, and thinks he can solve both with one gesture. He means well, but he's a fool." "Livia," Gaius protested. "You are, father," she said firmly. "But you're also right about one thing. I have refused every suitor. Do you know why?" Gaius shook his head, looking between his daughter and Marcus with confusion. "Because they were all soft," Livia said simply. "Pampered boys who knew nothing of real loss, real struggle. They looked at me and saw a pretty face and my father's wealth. They never saw," she paused, then continued more quietly, "they never saw someone who held her dying mother's hand for 3 days and nights, who watched her father dragged away in chains while neighbors jeered, who fought to keep creditors from taking our home while everyone whispered that we were finished." She turned back to Marcus. "You want to leave because you think you have nothing to offer. But what if what I need isn't comfort or ease? What if what I need is someone who understands that sometimes the world breaks you, and the only choice is whether you stay broken or build something new from the pieces?" Marcus stared at her, something stirring in his chest that he'd thought dead forever. Not love. It was far too soon for that. But possibility. The dangerous, terrifying possibility that maybe his story wasn't over. "This is insane," he said, but without conviction. "Yes," Livia agreed. "But so is surviving 10 years in the arena. So is saving a stranger's life at risk to your own. So is my father thinking he can arrange my life like a business contract." She shot her father a look that was equal parts affection and exasperation. "But perhaps there's wisdom in insanity sometimes. What do you say?" Gaius asked, hope evident in his voice. Livia returned her attention to Marcus. "I'm saying that I'm not a prize to be won or a debt to be paid. I'm a woman who makes her own choices. And I choose," she took a breath, "I choose to know more about the man who valued my father's life above his own safety. I choose to discover if the humanity that saved him still exists beneath your scars. I choose to see if two broken people might build something whole together. And if they can't," Marcus asked, his voice rough. "Then we'll have tried," Livia said simply, "which is more than either of us is doing now, standing still in our separate ruins." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. Not Julia, never Julia, but someone else entirely. Someone who'd faced her own darkness and chosen to keep walking. Someone offering not healing that was too simple, but the chance to be broken together until maybe, possibly, they could remember how to be whole. "I make no promises," he said finally. "Neither do I," Livia replied. "But I suggest we start with tomorrow. Have breakfast with us. Let my father tell you more stories while I correct his arithmetic. Let's see if a gladiator can learn to be a guest, and if a merchant's daughter can teach him." Despite himself, Marcus felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "Your father will be insufferable if we agree to this." "He's insufferable anyway," Livia said, causing Gaius to sputter in mock offense. "At least this way, his insufferability serves a purpose." Marcus nodded slowly. "Tomorrow then. Breakfast." "Excellent." Gaius clapped his hands, looking like a child who'd received an unexpected gift. "This calls for more wine." As Gaius bustled about calling for servants, Livia moved closer to Marcus. "I should warn you," she said quietly, "I'm not an easy woman to live with. I speak my mind, I can't cook, and I have been known to throw things when angry." "I should warn you," Marcus replied in the same tone, "that I haven't held a conversation this long in 10 years. I'll likely disappoint you in every social situation. Then we'll disappoint people together, Livia said. It might even be entertaining. That night, Marcus lay in the guest chamber's soft bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a decade, his thoughts weren't filled with combat strategies or death memories. Instead, he thought about intelligent dark eyes and the strange courage of a woman who looked at a killer and chose to see a man. He thought about Julia too, and for the first time the memory didn't bring only pain. "Promise me you'll live," she'd said, "not just survive. Live." Perhaps Marcus thought as sleep finally claimed him. Perhaps tomorrow he could try to learn the difference. Dawn broke over Rome with a crimson splash across the sky, and Marcus woke with a gladiator's instinct, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. For a moment the soft bed confused him, the silk sheets an alien sensation against scarred skin. Then memory returned. Freedom, Gaius, and most unsettling of all, Livia with her challenging eyes and unexpected proposal. He rose and dressed in the toga Gaius had provided, the civilian garment still feeling like a costume. Through the window he could see slaves already moving through the garden, tending to roses that seemed to bloom impossibly bright. In the arena the only flowers had been those thrown by the crowd, landing on blood-soaked sand like mockery. A knock at his door interrupted his dark thoughts. "The family breaks their fast in the garden," a young slave boy announced. Marcus followed him through corridors, decorated with frescoes of mythological scenes, Odysseus returning home, Orpheus seeking Eurydice, stories of loss and searching that seemed to watch him pass with knowing eyes. The garden was awash with morning light, and Gaius sat at a table laden with bread, honey, figs and cheese. But it was Livia who drew Marcus's attention. She wore a simple stola of pale blue, her hair bound back practically rather than in yesterday's elaborate style. She was reviewing what appeared to be accounting scrolls, stylus moving with quick efficiency. "Ah, Marcus," Gaius beamed. "I was just telling Livia about the time I tried to negotiate with those Phoenician traders without her help. Cost me a fortune in overpayments." Livia looked up from her work, and something passed between her and Marcus. An acknowledgement of the strangeness of their situation, tinged with wary curiosity. "Father believes every merchant is as honest as he is," she said, setting aside her scrolls. "It's both his greatest virtue and most expensive flaw." Marcus sat carefully, still moving like a fighter, expecting attack. Livia noticed and poured him wine herself, a gesture that made Gaius raise his eyebrows. In patrician households, such tasks were for slaves. "Tell me," Livia said, settling back with her own cup, "what does a gladiator eat before combat? I've always wondered if the stories of special diets were true." It was a clever opening, asking about his past without probing wounds. Marcus found himself describing the barley porridge that gladiators called gladiator food, the way they believed it built a layer of fat to protect against minor cuts. Livia listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the strategy behind things others might dismiss as superstition. "Fascinating," Gaius interjected. "Though I can't imagine you carrying extra fat. Marcus, you look carved from marble." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but Livia smoothly redirected. "Speaking of marble, Father, didn't you promise to show Marcus the warehouse district today? He should understand the scope of your operations if he's to stay with us." The gratitude Marcus felt for her social rescue surprised him. Julia had done similar things once, helping him navigate civilian interactions after his military service. But where Julia had been gentle, Livia was strategic, managing the conversation like a general positioning troops. The day progressed with unexpected ease. Gaius proved an enthusiastic guide, showing Marcus through warehouses filled with goods from across the empire. "Silk from Sina," he announced proudly, running cloth through his fingers, "worth its weight in silver." Livia negotiated exclusive contracts with the Eastern traders. They respect her, say she has the mind of a man, but the intuition of a woman, best of both worlds. Marcus watched Livia during these pronouncements, noting how she deflected praise even while clearly taking pride in her accomplishment. She moved through the warehouse with confidence, checking inventory, greeting workers by name, solving problems with quick decisions. When a dispute arose between two dock workers over damaged goods, she mediated with a fairness that left both men satisfied. "You run this," Marcus observed when Gaius had wandered off to inspect a new shipment. It wasn't a question. Livia glanced at him, seeming to weigh his reaction. "Does that disturb you?" "Many men find it unnatural." Marcus thought of Julia, who'd run their household with quiet efficiency, who'd managed his tempers and soothed his nightmares, who'd been the true strength behind his soldier's facade. "Strength is strength," he said simply. "Only fools ignore it because of its source." Something shifted in Livia's expression, a softening perhaps, or recognition. "You're not what I expected from a gladiator," she admitted. "Though I suppose you weren't always one. Father mentioned you were a soldier first." "Ninth Legion," Marcus confirmed. "Stationed in Germania for 5 years before." He trailed off, not ready to voice the rest. "Before I came home to build a life. Before the plague stole everything. Before I became a killer for sport." Livia didn't. Instead, she showed him the accounting system she'd developed, explaining how she tracked shipments and managed credit with various trading houses. Her enthusiasm for the work was infectious, and Marcus found himself asking questions, genuinely curious about this world of commerce, so different from the violence he'd known. Lunch was taken at a small tavern near the docks, a place Gaius claimed served the best fish stew in Rome. The proprietor, a gap-toothed Sicilian, greeted them warmly, clearly familiar with the merchant family. "And who's this?" he asked, eyeing Marcus's scars with the wariness common folk showed around obvious fighters. "A friend," Livia said firmly. "One who deserves your best stew, Antonius." The simple declaration of friendship struck Marcus unexpectedly. When had he last been called friend? The other gladiators had been comrades in survival, nothing more. Relationships in the arena were dangerous. The man sharing your cell might be the one you faced across the sand tomorrow. As they ate, Gaius regaled them with stories of his early trading days, but Marcus noticed Livia watching him thoughtfully. "What?" he asked finally, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "You're left-handed," she observed, "but you eat with your right." Trained behavior. Marcus looked down at his hands, surprised she'd noticed. "The arena favors those who can fight with either hand. I trained myself to be comfortable with both." He didn't mention the months of brutal practice, the beatings taken while learning, the advantage it had given him in desperate moments. "Adaptability as survival," Livia murmured. "We have more in common than might appear." The afternoon brought unexpected crisis. A runner arrived, breathless and panicked, reporting that one of Gaius's ships had been seized by port authorities over disputed taxes. Gaius paled, but Livia was already moving, gathering documents and issuing rapid orders. "How much do they claim we owe?" she demanded. The sum the runner named made Gaius stagger. "That's more than the ship's entire cargo is worth. It's obvious extortion." Livia's face was grim. "The portmaster has a new assistant, probably looking to make his mark by squeezing successful merchants." She turned to her father. "You have that meeting with the Syrian traders." "I'll handle this." "I'll come with you," Marcus said suddenly. Both Livia and Gaius looked at him in surprise. "The port can be dangerous when money's involved," he explained, though he wasn't entirely sure why he'd volunteered. Perhaps it was the warrior's instinct to protect, dormant but not dead. Or perhaps it was curiosity about how this small, fierce woman would handle confrontation. Livia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Your presence might be useful. Some men respond better to implied force than logic." The Port Authority building was a study in bureaucratic corruption. Petty officials lounged about, extracting bribes from desperate merchants and ship captains. The assistant portmaster, a thin man named Cassius, with the look of a ferret, kept them waiting for an hour before deigning to see them. "Ah, the Lucianis family," he said with false warmth. "I'm afraid there's been an irregularity in your import documentation. The fine must be paid before your ship can be released." Livia spread her documents on his desk with controlled precision. Our documentation is perfect, as you can see. Every tax paid, every tariff accounted for. Cassius barely glanced at the papers. Nevertheless, my inspection found discrepancies. The fine stands. Marcus watched Livia's jaw tighten, but her voice remained calm. What specific discrepancies? Cassius waved dismissively. Technical matters. Too complex to explain. Just pay the fine and you can be on your way. It was clear extortion, and Marcus felt his hands clench. In the arena, such matters were settled simply. But Livia had subtler weapons. I see, she said sweetly. Then I'm sure you won't mind if I request a formal review by the Senate's Commerce Committee. My father has friends there who take special interest in port corruption. They just successfully prosecuted the last assistant who tried this scheme. I believe he's now breaking rocks in the quarries. The threat landed perfectly. Cassius's ferret face paled, but he tried to bluster. Are you threatening an imperial official? Livia's smile was sharp as a gladius. Threatening? Not at all. I'm simply following proper procedures when faced with questionable fines. Of course, if you'd like to review our documents more carefully, you might find those discrepancies were mere misunderstandings. The silence stretched taut. Marcus could see Cassius calculating the potential profit versus the risk of investigation. Finally, greed won over caution. The fine could be reduced, he said slowly, for a handling fee. Say, 10% of the original amount. 5%, Livia countered immediately. Paid in private, no records. They settled on 7%, still extortion but manageable. As they left, Marcus noted Livia's hands shaking slightly. Well played, he said quietly. She laughed, but it had a brittle edge. Welcome to the arena of commerce, where the weapons are words and the blood is gold. They walked in companionable silence through the port district. The sun was setting, painting the Tiber like molten bronze. You could have mentioned my background, Marcus observed. Implied violence to support your position. Livia glanced at him, and make you into a threat to be used. No, you're not my weapon, Marcus. If we're to build anything, it must be as equals. The word build hung between them, heavy with possibility. They both knew they were dancing around the larger question. Could two damaged people create something whole? As if reading his thoughts, Livia spoke again. My mother died slowly, a wasting disease that took 2 years to finish its work. I watched her fade day by day, tried every cure, prayed to every god. Nothing helped. She paused at a fountain, trailing her fingers through the water. After she died, I couldn't bear softness. Flowers reminded me of her funeral, gentle voices of her final whispers. I armored myself in numbers and contracts, in hardness that couldn't be hurt again. Marcus understood. After Julia and Quintus, he'd armored himself too, just with different materials, muscle and skill and the ability to deal death. But armor grows heavy, he said. Livia looked at him with those perceptive eyes. Yes, and eventually you forget what you're protecting underneath it. They returned to find Gaius frantic with worry, which transformed into effusive praise when he heard how Livia had handled the situation. Over dinner he insisted on toasting her cleverness repeatedly, until even Livia's composed facade cracked into genuine laughter. You encourage him, she accused Marcus, who had joined in the toasts. He needs little encouragement when it comes to praising you, Marcus replied, surprising himself with the ease of the banter. When had he last joked with someone? The wine was good, the food better, and for hours Marcus forgot to be a gladiator. He was just a man sharing a meal with friends because that's what they were becoming, against all logic. Gaius told embarrassing stories of Livia's childhood stubbornness, while she retaliated with tales of his trading disasters. Marcus found himself contributing his own stories, carefully selected ones from his legion days that avoided the shadows. You smiled, Livia said suddenly during a lull in conversation. Marcus touched his face, startled. She nodded, studying him with that intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but wasn't. It suits you. You should do it more often. Before Marcus could respond, Gaius yawned dramatically. The hour grows late, and these old bones need rest. Marcus, walk with Livia in the garden. The night air is pleasant, and I'm sure you have much to discuss about today's adventure. His exit was transparently orchestrated, but neither protested. The garden was silver with moonlight, jasmine perfuming the air. They walked slowly, not touching but aware of each other's presence. He's not subtle, Livia observed. No, Marcus agreed, but his heart is good. They paused by a statue of Minerva, goddess of wisdom and war. Appropriate, Marcus thought, for a woman who wielded intelligence like a weapon. I need to know, Livia said abruptly. Your family, will you tell me? The question he'd been dreading, but somehow, in the moonlit garden with this woman who'd shown her own scars, it didn't seem impossible. Julia was, he began, then stopped, searching for words that could capture a life. She was warmth. Where I was hard from military life, she was soft. Where I was quick to anger, she found humor. She made me better than I was. The words came slowly, but they came. And your son, Marcus smiled despite the pain. Quintus, 5 years old, and convinced he would be the greatest soldier Rome had ever seen. He'd march around with a wooden sword, demanding I teach him formations. Julia would scold us both when we trampled her herb garden during practice. They sound wonderful, Livia said softly. They were. Marcus looked at the stars, wondering if the dead could see the living. The plague came suddenly. One day Julia had a slight fever. The next she could barely breathe. Quintus fell ill the day after. I tried everything, doctors, prayers, offerings. Nothing worked. They died within hours of each other, at least spared separation. His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly Livia's hand was on his arm, warm and steady. I'm sorry, she said simply. No platitudes about the God's will or time healing wounds. Just acknowledgement of loss. The soldiers came that same night, Marcus continued, needing to finish now that he'd started. Apparently I'd been marked as good recruitment for the arena. Former legions strong, no political connections. They didn't care that I had bodies to bury. They put me in chains and dragged me away. I never even... He stopped, unable to voice the final cruelty that he'd never properly said goodbye. Never performed the funeral rites, never visited their graves. Livia's hand tightened on his arm. That's why you saved my father. Not just mercy but memory. You saw him looking at me and remembered your own farewells stolen. Marcus looked at her, startled by her perception. Yes, they stood in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of shared understanding, of wounds acknowledged if not healed. Finally, Livia spoke again. I won't try to replace her. I couldn't if I wanted to. We're too different. But perhaps there's room for something new. Not instead of, but in addition to. Marcus turned to face her fully. In the moonlight she looked like a goddess herself, not Venus with her soft beauty, but Diana, fierce and independent. Why? He asked. You could have any man in Rome. Why choose a broken gladiator? Livia's laugh was rueful. Could I? The men who court merchant daughters want dowries and connections, sons and submission. They see my intelligence as a flaw to be corrected, my independence as a challenge to be broken. You're the first man who's looked at my strength without flinch. She paused, then added more quietly, and maybe I'm tired of being alone in my armor. Maybe I want someone who understands that hearts can be both broken and beating. Marcus made a decision then, one that would have seemed impossible that morning. He held out his hand, palm up, not demanding, just offering. Livia looked at it for a long moment, then placed her own hand in his. Her fingers were soft where his were calloused, small where his were large, but her grip was firm. We'll probably fail, he warned. Probably, she agreed. But imagine if we don't. They walked back to the villa hand in hand, neither speaking. Gaius was certainly watching from some window, probably weeping with joy at his matchmaking success. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges, the difficulty of two stubborn people learning to bend without breaking. But tonight, in a moonlit garden, two armored souls had found the courage to be vulnerable. It was a start. The next weeks passed in a strange dance of discovery. Marcus slowly learned the rhythms of civilian life, while Livia introduced him to the complexities of commerce. He accompanied her on business dealings, his presence shifting from protection to partnership as he grasped the strategies involved. She in turn asked him to teach her basic self-defense, arguing that a woman who dealt with rough dock workers should know how to protect herself. The lessons became a form of courtship, charged with tension as Marcus guided her through movements, as she learned to read his moods and he learned to voice his thoughts. Gaius watched it all with barely contained delight, though he had the wisdom not to push too hard. When Marcus expressed interest in investing his Gladiator winnings, a substantial sum after 10 years of victory, Gaius helped him purchase shares in trading ventures. Keep coin working, he advised, and it multiplies like rabbits. Livia showed Marcus how to read contracts and calculate profits, their heads bent together over scrolls in the evening lamplight. Sometimes their hands would brush, reaching for the same document, and both would pull back as if burned, then laugh at their own awkwardness. The nights were hardest for Marcus. Dreams of the arena mixed with memories of Julia and Quintus, creating landscapes of loss where he fought endless battles to reach his family, but never could. More than once he woke to find Livia in his doorway, wrapped in a shawl and carrying warm wine. "I heard you cry out," she would say simply, and they'd sit in his room or the garden, not talking about the dreams, but letting silence do the healing words couldn't. She never asked him to be whole. She never flinched from his broken places. And slowly, Marcus began to believe that perhaps the promise he'd made to Julia, to live not just survive, might actually be possible. 1 month after his freedom, Marcus made his own decision. He found Livia in her favorite spot, a bench overlooking the river, where she did her morning calculations. "I've been thinking," he began, without preamble. She looked up, stylus paused. "A dangerous activity for a gladiator," she teased, but her eyes were serious. Marcus took a breath. "Your father offered you to pay a debt. You offered yourself for your own reasons, but I've offered nothing. I've simply taken your kindness, your patience, your understanding." "Marcus," he held up a hand, "let me finish. I want to offer something in return, not because of debt or arrangement, but because," he struggled for words to match his feelings, "because when I wake from nightmares, I think of you, because when you smile over successful negotiations, I feel pride as if they were my own victory, because you make me want to be more than what I've been." Livia set aside her scrolls completely, giving him her full attention. "What are you offering?" Marcus knelt, not in submission but in declaration. From his toga, he produced a simple iron ring. "This was my legion ring, the only thing they let me keep in the arena, too worthless for guards to steal. I want you to have it, not as a betrothal, not yet, but as a promise, that I'll try to be the man you seem to see when you look at me, that I'll learn to build instead of destroy, that maybe, eventually, I can offer you the kind of partnership you deserve." Livia took the ring, turning it in the morning light. It was scratched and worn, nothing like the gold bands patrician women wore, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You already are that man," she said softly. "You just can't see it yet." She slipped the ring onto a chain around her neck, letting it rest against her heart. Then she stood and kissed him, not passionate but tender, a promise matching his promise. When they parted, Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a bone finally setting after being broken. Not healed, not yet, but beginning. "Your father will be insufferable," he warned, and Livia laughed. "He's already planning the wedding feast. I've seen the receipts." They walked back to the villa, together, and if their steps were lighter, if their hands found each other without awkwardness, if the future seemed less impossible than before, Well, perhaps the gods occasionally smiled on broken things determined to become whole. But the gods, as Marcus should have remembered, had a cruel sense of timing. That very afternoon, as Gaius celebrated the progress with specially imported wine, a visitor arrived who would shatter their fragile peace. The man was tall and scarred, with the bearing of a soldier and eyes that had seen too much death. Marcus recognized him instantly, though 10 years had passed. Lucius, he breathed. His brother-in-law, Julia's brother, the man who'd blamed him for not being there when the plague struck, for not dying beside his family like a proper husband should have. Lucius's eyes were cold as winter steel. "Hello, Marcus. I heard you finally won your freedom. I've been waiting." The tension in the room was suffocating. Gaius looked between the two men with confusion, while Livia's hand instinctively moved to the ring at her throat. Marcus stood slowly, every muscle tensed for violence that seemed inevitable. "Lucius," he said again, voice carefully neutral, "I thought you were dead." The other man's smile was sharp as a blade. "Disappointed? No. I survived the Germanic campaigns, no thanks to you. Came back to find my sister and nephew in unmarked graves, and my brother-in-law playing Gladiator for cheering crowds." "It wasn't like that," Marcus began, but Lucius cut him off with a gesture. "Save your words. I know you were taken. I also know you survived while they died alone. You got to keep breathing while they rotted." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt the old guilt rise, threatening to choke him. How many nights had he tortured himself with the same thoughts? "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Livia suggested, her voice calm but firm. Lucius noticed her for the first time, his eyes taking in her protective stance near Marcus. "And who's this? Found a replacement already?" The insult snapped something in Marcus. He moved forward, but Livia's hand on his arm stopped him. "I am Livia Luciana," she said with icy dignity. "This is my father's house, and you are a guest. You will speak with respect, or leave." Lucius laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Respect for the man who let my sister die, who dishonored her memory in the arena." He turned back to Marcus. "Did you tell her how gladiators earn their victories? The deals made, the opponents paid to fall, or does she think you're some noble warrior?" "Enough," Marcus growled. "Whatever you came here to say, say it, but leave them out of it." Lucius reached into his cloak and produced a scroll. "I came to deliver this, a formal challenge, tomorrow, at dawn, in the old training grounds outside the city. We settle this like soldiers, not performers." He tossed the scroll at Marcus's feet. "Unless you've forgotten how to fight without an audience." Every instinct screamed at Marcus to accept. The arena had taught him to meet violence with violence, to solve problems with blood. But Livia's presence beside him, Gaius's shocked face, the life he'd begun to build, all of it demanded a different response. "I won't fight you, Lucius," Marcus said quietly. "I've spilled enough blood for one lifetime." The rage that crossed Lucius's face was terrible. "Coward, you hide behind a woman's skirts now." The Marcus you knew would never. He stopped, breathing hard. "The Marcus you knew died with them," Marcus interrupted. "I'm trying to be someone else now, someone who doesn't solve grief with swords." For a moment something flickered in Lucius's eyes, pain deeper than anger, but it passed quickly. "Then you're not worth killing," he spat. "Keep your new life, such as it is, but know this. Julia would be ashamed of what you've become." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I investigated after I returned, found the neighbors who heard her calling for you as she died, found the doctor who said another day might have made a difference. You could have saved them if you'd been there. Remember that when you play house with your merchant's daughter." Then he was gone, leaving silence like a physical weight. Marcus stood frozen, Lucius's words echoing in his mind. Another day might have made a difference. You could have saved them. The guilt he'd managed to cage came roaring back, threatening to devour him whole. "Marcus," Livia said softly, but he pulled away from her touch. "Don't. He's right. I should have been there. I should have." His voice broke. "You were in chains," Gaius said firmly. "How could you have done anything?" But Marcus wasn't listening. The fragile peace he'd built crumbled like sand. He saw Julia's face, imagined her calling his name, needing him, dying without him. "I need air," he managed, and fled the villa before anyone could stop him. He wandered Rome's streets aimlessly, ending up at the Colosseum as if drawn by invisible chains. The great arena loomed in the darkness, scene of so much death. His death, in a way, the death of the man who'd been a husband and father, replaced by a killer who'd learned to make crowds cheer. "Impressive, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find a woman watching him, her bearing regal despite simple clothes. There was something familiar about her face, but he couldn't place it. "They say 1,000,000 men have died for Rome's entertainment," she continued. "I wonder if the stones remember their names." Marcus studied her more carefully. She was perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see too much. "Do I know you?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "We've never met, but we have something in common. My husband died in that arena 5 years ago. He was a political prisoner, condemned for speaking against the emperor. I watched from the senators' seats as beasts tore him apart." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, meaning it. "I don't remember." She waved his words away. "You weren't the one who killed him, but I watched you fight many times since, trying to understand what makes a good man kill for sport. What breaks inside to make it possible?" Marcus had no answer. The woman continued. "Then I realized we're all in the arena, one way or another, fighting battles others orchestrate, performing for audiences who don't care if we live or die. The only choice is whether we let it define us." She pulled her cloak tighter. "I saw you spare men when you could, saw you protect the weak even when it cost you favor. That's why I followed you tonight." "Followed me?" The woman nodded. "My name is Claudia. I lead a group of citizens working to end the games. We need men like you, survivors who can speak to the horror of it. Your voice could save lives." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. "I'm no speaker. I have enough battles to fight." Claudia studied him. "The man who challenged you. I heard the confrontation. He's wrong, you know. The dead don't want our guilt. They want our lives to mean something." She pressed a small token into his hand, a clay disc marked with a dove. "If you change your mind, show this at the baths of Agrippa. Someone will find you." Then she melted into the darkness, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He looked at the token, then at the arena. "The dead don't want our guilt. They want our lives to mean something." But what meaning could a gladiator's life have? He thought of Livia, probably worried and waiting, of Gaius, who'd offered him a new family, of the life he'd begun to build from the ashes of the old. It wasn't betrayal to live. It was what Julia had asked of him with her dying breath. The walk back to the villa felt like crossing a battlefield. Each step was a choice, toward life or toward the death. Lucius offered. By the time he reached the gate, he'd made his decision. Livia was in the garden, sitting where they'd first walked together. She looked up as he approached, her face carefully composed. "I thought you might not return," she said quietly. Marcus sat beside her, not touching but close. "I considered accepting Lucius's challenge, letting him have his revenge. It would be easier than this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "This?" Livia asked. "Living," Marcus clarified. "Building something new when the old still hurts. Caring for people when loss is always possible. Your father was wrong to think I could offer you protection. I can't even protect myself from ghosts." Livia was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "Do you think I want protection? If I wanted safety, I'd have married some fat merchant's son and spent my days planning dinner parties. I chose you because you understand that safety is an illusion, that loss is always possible, that the only real choice is whether we face it alone or together." She turned to him then, and in the moonlight he could see tears on her cheeks. "I'm not Julia. I'll never be her, and I don't want to be. But I'm here, and I'm real, and I'm choosing to take the risk of caring for a man who might always carry ghosts. The question is whether you can choose to let me." Marcus looked at her, really looked. Not Julia's replacement, but Livia herself. Strong, where Julia had been gentle. Sharp, where Julia had been soft. But no less valuable for the differences. "The ring," he said suddenly. "You still wear it?" Her hand went to her throat. "Of course. A promise is a promise." Marcus made another choice then, perhaps the hardest of his life. He took her hand and held it against his chest, where his heart beat steadily despite everything. "Then I choose too, not to forget, I'll never forget, but to make room for more than memory, to let the past be past, and the future be possible." Livia's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "That's all I ask. That's all anyone can ask." They sat together in the garden, hands clasped, watching stars that had witnessed so much pain, but still dared to shine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lucius might return. The memories would certainly resurface. But tonight, two wounded souls chose hope over fear, connection over isolation. And in that choice, perhaps, lay the beginning of healing. "Your father will definitely be insufferable now," Marcus said after a while. Livia laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "He's already planning children. I've seen him eyeing properties near good schools." The thought should have terrified Marcus. Children meant vulnerability, meant possible loss. But looking at Livia, he found himself imagining a different future, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new, something worth the risk. "One step at a time," he said. "First, I need to learn to be a proper Roman citizen, then a husband, then, maybe." He trailed off, but Livia understood. "One step at a time," she agreed. They stayed in the garden until dawn painted the sky purple and gold, planning a future that seemed impossible but was no less precious for its fragility. And when Gaius found them there, fallen asleep against each other like exhausted soldiers after a battle, he wept with joy and immediately began planning a wedding that would be talked about for years. But that's a story for another day. For now, it was enough that a gladiator had chosen life over death, love over solitude, and hope over despair. In the arena, that would be victory enough. He woke not to the clash of practice weapons, but to Livia's quiet movements as she dressed for another day of managing her father's business empire. They had married 3 months ago in a ceremony that Gaius had indeed made the talk of Rome, not for its grandeur, but for its sincerity. The bride and groom had written their own vows, speaking of broken places made stronger and the courage to build anew. Even cynical merchants had dabbed at their eyes, but peace, Marcus had learned, was more fragile than any opponent he'd faced in the arena. It came in the form of a letter, delivered on an ordinary Tuesday morning while he and Livia reviewed plans for a new warehouse. The seal was imperial, and Marcus's blood chilled as he recognized it. "What is it?" Livia asked, noticing his tension. Marcus broke the seal with hands that wanted to tremble. The message was brief, but devastating. "The divine Emperor Commodus commands the presence of Marcus Aurelius Decimus, formerly of the arena, for a matter of imperial justice. Present yourself at the palace before sunset, or face the consequences of defiance." "I have to go," Marcus said, his voice hollow. Livia snatched the letter, reading quickly. "This is madness. You're a free citizen now. The emperor has no claim on you." But they both knew better. Commodus's whims were law, and his cruelty was legendary. "I'll come with you," Livia declared. "No." Marcus's refusal was sharp. "Whatever this is, I won't have you touched by it. If I don't return." She silenced him with a kiss fierce enough to bruise. "You will return, because if you don't, I'll march into that palace myself and demand answers. And you know I will." Despite everything, Marcus smiled. His wife was indeed capable of storming the imperial palace. It was one of the many things he loved about her. Her absolute refusal to be cowed by anyone or anything. The palace was a maze of marble and menace. Guards with dead eyes escorted Marcus through corridors where beauty masked barbarism. In alcoves meant for art, he glimpsed implements of torture. The throne room doors were flanked by the Praetorian Guard, The throne room doors were flanked by the Praetorian Guard, their purple cloaks, like dried blood, in the torchlight. Inside, Commodus lounged on the imperial throne, a figure of decadent madness dressed in silk and cruelty. But it was the man standing beside him that made Marcus's heart stop. Lucius, Julia's brother, wore the uniform of a Praetorian officer now, his face a mask of satisfaction. The famous Marcus. Commodus clapped his hands like a delighted child. My new advisor tells me the most fascinating stories about you. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though rage boiled in his chest. So this was Lucius's revenge. Not a soldier's duel, but a serpent's whisper in a mad emperor's ear. Divine Emperor, Marcus said, bowing precisely as low as required, and no lower. Commodus giggled, an unnerving sound from a man who held the power of life and death. Lucius says you were quite the performer in my arena, that crowds loved you almost as much as they love me. The comparison was dangerous. Commodus tolerated no rivals in public affection. I fought to survive, nothing more, Marcus replied carefully. The glory was always Rome's. It was the right answer. Commodus nodded approvingly. Modest. I like that. Unlike some gladiators who think freedom makes them important. He leaned forward, eyes glittering with malice. But Lucius also tells me disturbing things, that you showed mercy to enemies, that you questioned the justice of the games, that you even saved condemned criminals from righteous execution. Marcus could see the trap closing. Deny it, and Lucius would produce witnesses. Confirm it, and face Commodus's wrath. He chose a middle path. I fought as the crowd demanded. Divine Emperor. Sometimes they called for mercy, sometimes for blood. I was merely their instrument. Commodus considered this, fingers drumming on his throne. Yes, the crowd. They do love their little dramas. But here's what interests me more. Lucius says you've grown soft. That marriage to a merchant's daughter has made you forget what you are. He stood, moving with the predator's grace that made him dangerous despite his madness. You see, I have a problem, Marcus. There's a group of senators plotting against me, conspirators who think they can replace me with someone more traditional. Marcus remained silent, knowing anything he said could be twisted. Commodus continued circling him. I need them eliminated, quietly, efficiently. Who better than Rome's greatest gladiator? After all, you have experience making death look like entertainment. The request was monstrous. Not combat, but assassination. Not justice, but murder. I'm no longer a gladiator, Marcus said carefully. I'm a citizen, a merchant. Commodus's laughter cut him off. You're what I say you are, and I say you're my weapon. Unless, he paused dramatically, unless you prefer I find other uses for your talents. I understand your wife runs her father's business. Terrible how vulnerable merchants are to imperial audits. And your father-in-law such an old man, it would be tragic if he were arrested for treason based on evidence. The threat was clear. Marcus felt the walls closing in, the freedom he'd fought for crumbling like sand. How many? He asked, voice dead. Commodus smiled, victorious. 5 senators, their names and locations will be provided. You have 1 month. Succeed, and your family prospers under imperial protection. Fail, he didn't need to finish. Lucius stepped forward, unable to hide his satisfaction. The emperor's merciful, Ruther. He offers you a chance to serve Rome again. Marcus looked at the man who'd once been family, seeing the poison grief had become. This won't bring them back, Lucius. Julia wouldn't want this. Something flickered in Lucius's eyes, pain or doubt, but it vanished quickly. Don't speak her name. You lost that right when you let her die. Commodus waved dismissively. Family drama bores me. You have your orders, Marcus. Oh, and to ensure your cooperation, he gestured, and guards brought in a figure that made Marcus's blood freeze. Gaius, chained and bloody, his merchant's finery replaced with prisoners' rags. Father, Marcus started forward, but stopped at the sound of drawn swords. Gaius raised his head with effort. Marcus, I'm sorry. They came to the warehouse. Commodus smiled at Marcus's stricken expression. Insurance. Complete your task, and he goes free. Fail, and he dies slowly. Very slowly. I've been practicing new methods. Marcus stood in that throne room, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Kill innocent men, or watch his new family destroyed. Become a monster again or lose everything he'd rebuilt. I need proof they're actually traitors, he said, grasping for any delay. If I'm to kill senators, I need to know it serves Rome. Commodus laughed. Proof? Their guilt is questioning me, but very well, Lucius will provide evidence. Manufactured or real, what does it matter? You have 1 month. He waved dismissal. Take him away. And Marcus, don't think of running. I have eyes everywhere. The journey home was a blur. Marcus's mind raced, seeking solutions that didn't exist. How could he protect Livia and Gaius? How could he avoid becoming the weapon Commodus demanded? The villa was too quiet when he arrived. Livia waited in the atrium, her face pale but composed. They took father 3 hours ago, she said without preamble. I've already contacted every advocate we know. The charges are obviously false. Marcus pulled her into his arms, cutting off her practical words. For a moment, she resisted, then collapsed against him. What did he want? She whispered. Marcus told her everything, watching her expression shift from hope to horror to determination. When he finished, she pulled back, eyes blazing. We'll find another way. There's always another way. Not this time, Marcus said heavily. Commodus holds all the power. If I refuse... Livia gripped his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then we think, we plan. We don't just surrender to madness. She began pacing, her merchant's mind already working. These senators, who are they? What do we know about them? Marcus listed the names Lucius had provided. Livia's eyes sharpened. Senators Cato and Aquilus are father's clients. They're good men, Marcus. Their only crime is believing Rome should be governed by law rather than whim. She stopped pacing. But Senator Flavius, father always said he was corrupt. And Senators Drusus and Marcellus have connections to the eastern smuggling rings. You're suggesting I be selective in my murders? Marcus asked bitterly. Livia turned on him. I'm suggesting we investigate before acting. If some of these men are actually guilty of crimes, if we can find real evidence... She trailed off, but Marcus understood. It was a slim hope, find enough genuine wrongdoing to satisfy Commodus, while protecting the innocent. Even if we could, I'd still be an assassin, Marcus pointed out. Livia's expression softened. Yes, but perhaps one who serves justice, rather than madness. It's not much, but it's something. Over the next days they worked together with desperate efficiency. Livia activated her network of merchant contacts, gathering information on the 5 senators. Marcus used darker channels, speaking to former gladiators and soldiers who lived in Rome's shadows. What they discovered was a complex web of politics and corruption. Senator Cato was indeed innocent. His only crime was proposing reforms to limit imperial power. Senator Aquilus had spoken against the games, earning Commodus's ire. But the other 3, Senator Flavius, had embezzled funds meant for veteran settlements, leaving soldiers destitute. Senator Drusus ran a smuggling operation that included slaves taken illegally from allied territories. Senator Marcellus had a taste for children that he satisfied through kidnapped street orphans. 3 monsters and 2 good men, Livia summarized grimly. How do we save the innocent without condemning father? Marcus had been thinking about this. What if the guilty senators died, but in ways that exposed their crimes? Public scandal rather than quiet assassination. Livia's eyes lit with possibility. Commodus loved spectacle. If their deaths entertained him while removing threats, it was dangerous, but it was a plan. They would target the corrupt senators first, making their deaths elaborate moral tales that would appeal to Commodus's theatrical nature. Meanwhile, they would find ways to make Cato and Aquilus disappear without actually killing them. fake their deaths and smuggle them from Rome. The first target was Senator Flavius. Marcus studied his routines, learned his weakness. The man visited a particular brothel every week, always the same room, always alone. It was there Marcus confronted him, not with a blade but with evidence. 50 talents stolen from the veteran fund, Marcus said, spreading documents on the bed where Flavius cowered. Men who bled for Rome left to starve, while you built your villa. Flavius tried to bluster, then bribe, then beg. But Marcus had seen too much death to be moved by the tears of the corrupt. You have a choice, he said coldly. Write a full confession, name your accomplices, then drink this. He produced a vial of poison, quick, relatively painless. If I refuse, Flavius asked. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Then I fulfill the emperor's command differently. Did you know there are ways to make a man take days to die? I learned them all in the arena. Flavius wrote the confession with shaking hands, then drank the poison. Marcus waited until the end, then arranged the scene, the confession prominently displayed, the stolen funds listed in detail. By morning, all Rome would know of Flavius's crimes. 1 down, 4 to go, and each death would stain Marcus's soul a little more, no matter how guilty the victim. But for Gaius, for Livia, for the life they'd built, he would bear the stains. Senator Drusus proved more challenging. The smuggler was paranoid, surrounded by guards. But every man had weaknesses, and Drusus's was his greed. Marcus posed as a buyer interested in exotic slaves, offering prices too good to refuse. The meeting was set on one of Drusus's ships, away from his usual protections. The senator arrived confident, already counting profits. He didn't expect the slaves Marcus had brought to be freed gladiators, seeking vengeance for friends sold into bondage. You sold my brother to die in Syrian mines, one growled. My sister vanished into an eastern brothel, another added. Drusus tried to run, but there was nowhere to go, on a ship at sea. Wait, Marcus commanded before they could tear the senator apart. His death serves us better if it sends a message. They bound Drusus and sailed to the slave market he'd used for his illegal trade. There, in front of hundreds of witnesses, they revealed his crimes: citizens sold as slaves, children stolen from families, bribes paid to corrupt officials. The crowd's mood turned ugly as victims recognized the man who'd destroyed their lives. Marcus didn't need to deliver the killing blow. The mob did it for him, tearing Drusus apart while guards looked the other way. Justice, rough but effective. The confession they'd forced from him beforehand ensured his network would crumble. Senator Marcellus was the worst. Marcus had seen horrors in the arena, but the evidence of what this man did to children made him sick. No elaborate plan here. Marcus simply entered the senator's villa at night and found him with his latest victim, a boy no older than 8. The child's eyes were empty, already broken. Marcus's blade found Marcellus's throat before the man could scream, but he didn't let him die quickly. For every child, Marcus whispered, making each cut deliberate, for every innocence you destroy. When it was over, he carried the boy to safety, leaving Marcellus displayed with evidence of his crimes painted in his own blood on the walls. Rome would wake to horror, but also to justice. 3 senators dead, their crimes exposed. Commodus was delighted by the spectacle, sending Marcus congratulations on his creativity. But 2 innocent men remained, and time was running short. This was where Livia's brilliance shone. She'd arranged everything. False documents showing Cato and Aquilus had fled Rome, witnesses who'd swear they saw them board ships for distant provinces, even bodies from the morgue that could pass for the senators if not examined closely. The hardest part was convincing the senators themselves. These were proud men who didn't want to run. But when Marcus explained the alternative, when Livia showed them the evidence of their colleagues' fates, pragmatism won. We'll return when Commodus falls, Cato promised as he prepared to board a merchant ship bound for Britannia. And we'll remember what you risked for us. Aquilus clasped Marcus's arm. You could have just killed us. Many would have. That you didn't. There's honor in you still, Gladiator. Marcus felt no honor, only exhaustion. He'd saved 2 but killed 3, and their blood weighed on him regardless of their guilt. The staged evidence of the innocent senators' deaths was presented to Commodus, tragic ship accidents, bodies lost at sea. The emperor, drunk on wine and the elaborate deaths of the guilty, accepted the reports without question. Excellent work, he proclaimed, lounging in his throne. You've removed my enemies and entertained me. Perhaps I should find more tasks for my gladiator assassin. But Lucius stepped forward. The agreement was for 5 senators. Divine Emperor, the debt is paid. There was something strange in his expression as he looked at Marcus, not satisfaction but uncertainty. Commodus waved dismissively. Yes, yes, release the old merchant. But Marcus remains useful. I may call on him again. The threat hung in the air, but for now, it was enough. Gaius was released, traumatized but alive. The reunion at the villa was tearful, Livia clinging to her father, while Marcus stood apart, feeling unworthy of their joy. He'd saved them, but at what cost? That night, unable to sleep, Marcus walked the garden where he'd first begun to heal. The flowers seemed to mock him with their innocence. He'd thought himself free of the arena, but he'd just exchanged one kind of killing for another. You did what you had to, Livia said, joining him. She moved carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. I murdered 3 men, Marcus said flatly. Corrupt or not, I murdered them. Livia was quiet for a moment. Yes, and saved 2 innocent ones, and protected father, and kept us all from Commodus's worse impulses. She touched his arm gently. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying it was necessary. There's a difference. Marcus laughed bitterly. Is there? I'm a killer, Livia. In the arena or in the shadows, I'm still just a killer. She moved in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're a protector. You've always been a protector. In the arena, you protected those weaker than yourself. As a soldier, you protected Rome. Now you protect us. The methods are ugly, but the heart remains the same. Her words were meant to comfort, but Marcus couldn't accept the absolution. What happens when Commodus calls again? When he demands more deaths? How many can I kill before there's nothing left of the man you married? Livia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. Then we face that together, just as we've faced everything else. You're not alone in this darkness, Marcus. You never have to be alone again. They held each other in the garden, 2 souls bound by love and shadowed by necessity. The future remained uncertain. Commodus's madness grew daily, and his favor was as changeable as the wind. But for tonight, they had each other. They had survived. In the distance, Rome slept, unaware of the prices paid in shadow for its continued peace. Marcus had learned that freedom wasn't an ending, but a beginning, and that sometimes protecting what you love required staining your soul bad. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it, or die with it, because in Commodus's Rome, both were always possible, and love was the most dangerous rebellion of all. Winter came to Rome with unusual ferocity that year, as if the gods themselves reflected the empire's growing darkness. Marcus stood on the villa's balcony, watching snow dust the city's eternal stones. 6 months had passed since the senator affair, 6 months of waiting for Commodus's next command. The summons, when it finally came, arrived with the dawn, not through imperial messengers, but through Lucius himself. Julia's brother stood in their atrium, snow still melting on his praetorian cloak. The years of anger had carved deeper lines in his face, but something else lurked there now, doubt perhaps, or exhaustion. He wants you again, Lucius said without preamble. Another task. Marcus felt Livia tense beside him. She'd been reviewing contracts when Lucius arrived, but now her stylus lay forgotten. What now? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Lucius hesitated, unusual for a man who'd shown only certainty in his hatred. There's to be a special games, a reenactment of the siege of Jerusalem. But Commodus wants authenticity. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. He wants real defenders, real deaths. 100 condemned prisoners playing the Jews, slaughtered for entertainment. Marcus felt sick. He'd participated in staged battles before, but this was different. This was massacre, disguised as spectacle. And my role, you're to lead the Roman forces. ensure the historical accuracy of the slaughter. Lucius couldn't meet his eyes. Women and children, Marcus. He's including women and children among the defenders. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Livia, usually quick with solutions, seemed struck speechless by the monstrosity. I won't, Marcus said simply. Then he kills your family, Lucius replied, but the threat sounded hollow, even from him. He's already drawing up charges against Gaius. And Livia, he paused, something like pain crossing his features. He's noticed how beautiful your wife is, how clever. He collects such women. The implication hung in the air like poison. Livia stood, her face pale but determined. Then we run. Tonight. Father has contacts in Alexandria. Lucius cut her off with a sharp gesture. Every port is watched. Every road has informants. You wouldn't make it past the city gates. He finally looked directly at Marcus. But there might be another way. Both Marcus and Livia stared at him. This was unexpected. Lucius offering help rather than torment. Swim it, Marcus commanded. Lucius glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. Commodus grows more unstable daily. Even the Praetorians whisper. There are those who believe a change is necessary. You're talking about assassination, Livia breathed. I'm talking about survival, Lucius corrected. His madness threatens everyone now. Last week he had 2 Praetorians fed to lions for not applauding enthusiastically enough at his performance. He pulled out a small scroll. This contains names. People positioned to act, but they need someone with the skills and motivation to strike the final blow. Marcus took the scroll, but didn't open it. Why trust me? You've spent 2 years hating me. For the first time since his return, Lucius looked vulnerable. I went to their graves, Julia and Quintus. The neighbors told me how you'd built a small shrine in the garden, how you'd taught Quintus to read there, how Julia would sing while tending her herbs. His voice cracked. I hated you for surviving, but I think I hated myself more for not being there either. I was chasing glory in Germania while my sister died. At least you had chains as an excuse. The confession hung between them, years of misdirected grief, finally given voice. Marcus felt something ease in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. She wouldn't want this for either of us, he said quietly. The hatred, the killing. She always said, holding anger was like gripping hot coals. Lucius almost smiled. She did say that, usually when we'd fought over toys as children. He straightened, becoming the soldier again. Will you do it? Kill Commodus. Marcus looked at Livia, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. It was treason of the highest order. Failure meant not just death, but the kind of elaborate torture Commodus specialized in. But success. We need more than names, Livia said, ever practical. We need plans, access, timing. Lucius nodded approvingly. You're right to be cautious. The group meets tomorrow night at the old temple of Vesta, closed for repairs, but we have keys. Come alone, Marcus. Learn what we plan, then decide. After he left, Marcus and Livia sat in heavy silence. The weight of decision pressed down like mountain. It's not just about us anymore, Livia finally said. Those 100 prisoners, the women and children he plans to slaughter, future victims of his madness. Marcus knew she was right. He'd killed 3 corrupt senators to save his family. How many more would die if Commodus continued unchecked? If we do this and fail, he began, then we die together. Livia finished firmly. But if we do nothing, we die anyway, just more slowly, piece by piece, until nothing human remains. That night, they made love with desperate intensity, knowing it might be their last peaceful moment. Marcus traced the scars on his arms, each one a memory of the arena, while Livia kissed them as if she could heal old wounds with tenderness alone. The next evening found Marcus at the Temple of Vesta, hood pulled low against recognition. The ancient building was dark, scaffolding covering its sacred facade. Inside, 20 figures waited in the flickering torchlight. He recognized some senators who'd survived Commodus's purges by bending to his will, Praetorians whose honor chafed at serving madness, even a few wealthy merchants who'd lost fortunes to imperial whim. The gladiator comes, one senator observed. Are we so desperate? Another figure stepped forward. Claudia, the woman who'd approached him at the Colosseum. Desperate, yes, but also practical. Marcus has skills we need and motivation we can trust. She turned to him. Welcome to the resistance. What followed was a careful dance of revelation. The conspirators had been planning for months, documenting Commodus's excesses, identifying sympathizers, waiting for the right moment. That moment was fast approaching. The special games were set for 2 weeks hence, and the emperor would be exposed, focused on his performance. He plans to fight in the arena himself, Lucius explained, dressed as Hercules, battling monsters, chained prisoners made to wear animal skins. He'll be armed, but vulnerable, away from his usual protections. A Praetorian named Quintus, the name made Marcus flinch, added details. The imperial box will be lightly guarded. He insists on minimal protection during his performances. Says it ruins the atmosphere. 4 of us will be on duty. We'll ensure doors stay open. And after? Marcus asked. Who takes power? This was always the weakness of such plots. Removing a tyrant often just created a vacancy for another. The Senate will appoint a temporary leader, Claudia said. Someone respected, moderate. We're not trading one emperor for another tyrant. It sounded idealistic, but Marcus had learned that sometimes idealism was all that stood between civilization and chaos. I'll need to see the arena beforehand, he said, tacitly agreeing. Study the approaches, understand the layout. Relief flickered across multiple faces. They'd found their weapon. Over the following days, Marcus became 2 people. By day, he was the retired gladiator, accompanying Livia on business, dining with Gaius, playing the content civilian. By night, he met with conspirators, studied architectural plans, practiced with weapons he'd hoped never to hold again. Livia helped, her merchant's mind proving invaluable for logistics. She arranged for supplies to be smuggled into strategic locations, created false identities for conspirators who'd need to flee, even identified which foreign ambassadors might support regime change. You're frighteningly good at this, Marcus told her one night as she detailed escape routes. I'm a merchant's daughter, she replied with dark humor. We plan for all contingencies, including the fall of empires. 5 days before the games, everything nearly unraveled. Marcus was at the Colosseum, ostensibly checking on investments in gladiator schools, but actually memorizing guard positions, when he encountered someone unexpected, one of the prisoners scheduled for the massacre, being transferred to holding cells. She was young, perhaps 16, with the dark features that would mark her as Jewish for the performance. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They held the same mix of terror and determination he'd seen in Quintus's eyes during his son's final fever dreams. Please, she whispered, as guards shoved her past. I have a brother. He's only 6. They took him too. That night, Marcus raged in their villa's training room, attacking practice dummies with a fury that hadn't possessed him since his early arena days. Livia found him there, knuckles bloodied, surrounded by destroyed equipment. I can't save them, he said hoarsely. Even if we kill Commodus, those prisoners die. The games will continue. The children will still be slaughtered for entertainment. Livia approached carefully, as she had that first night in the garden. Perhaps not all of them. When Marcus looked at her uncomprehendingly, she explained. The conspiracy includes arena workers, guards who can be bribed. During the chaos of Commodus's death, some prisoners might escape, not all, but some. The young ones, at least. It was a dangerous addition to an already impossible plan, but Marcus seized on it like a drowning man grasping rope. They spent the night planning, adding layers to the conspiracy. Gaius, when told, immediately offered his warehouses as temporary hiding places. I've been a coward too long, the old merchant said. Let me be brave once. The final days passed in a blur of preparation. Weapons were hidden, bribes paid, prayers offered to gods who seemed to have abandoned Rome. Marcus found himself in the garden one last time, standing where he'd first glimpsed hope with Livia. Tomorrow he would either free Rome from a madman or die in the attempt. Either way, his time as a peaceful citizen was ending. "Regrets?" Livia asked, joining him. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Only that we didn't have more time, that I couldn't give you the peaceful life you deserved." She laughed, but it was sad. "I never wanted peace. I wanted purpose. You gave me that." They stayed there until dawn, watching the sky lighten over Rome. Then Marcus armed himself one final time, kissed his wife with all the passion of a man facing death, and went to kill an emperor. The Colosseum roared with 50,000 voices as Commodus entered the arena dressed as Hercules, complete with lion skin and club. Marcus watched from the gladiator's entrance, his own costume a tribute to Mars feeling like chains. Around him other conspirators prepared for their roles in the grotesque performance. The Jewish defenders huddled in the opposite entrance, terror radiating from them in waves. Marcus caught sight of the girl from before, clutching a small boy who must be her brother. The sight steeled his resolve. "Remember," Lucius whispered beside him, "dressed as a Roman centurion, wait for the third horn. That's when the Praetorians' change shifts. The confusion will give us moments." Marcus nodded, checking the real blade hidden beneath his costume sword. Everything depended on timing. Too early, and the guards would stop them. Too late, and innocents would already be dying. The first horn sounded. Commodus strutted before the crowd, proclaiming his divinity, promising them a spectacle worthy of the god. The crowd cheered, either from genuine enthusiasm or well-founded fear of seeming insufficiently supportive. The second horn brought the beginning of the mock battle. Roman soldiers marched in formation, while the prisoners were herded into a mockery of Jerusalem's walls, hastily built wooden structures that would offer no real protection. Marcus led his forces, playing his part while his eyes tracked every guard position, every exit, every conspirator in place. Then he saw something that nearly shattered his composure. Among the prisoners shoved forward with the rest was a face he recognized, Titus, a young gladiator he'd trained with years ago. The boy had won his freedom the year before Marcus. What was he doing among the condemned? Their eyes met across the sand, and Titus mouthed a single word, "Set up." Marcus's blood chilled. If Commodus knew about the conspiracy, but there was no time to abort. The third horn sounded, and everything happened at once. Lucius gave the signal. 4 Praetorians moved to secure the exits to the imperial box instead of guarding them. Other conspirators among the Roman soldiers turned their costume weapons into real threats, forming a protective barrier. And Marcus ran, not toward the prisoners, as scripted, but straight at the imperial box. Commodus saw him coming. The mad emperor's eyes widened, then narrowed with understanding. "Treachery," he screamed, raising his club. "Kill them all." But Marcus had momentum and years of arena experience. He vaulted the barrier, blade singing as it cleared its sheath. Commodus, for all his madness, had trained extensively. He met Marcus's attack with surprising skill, his club whistling through air where Marcus's head had been. Around them, chaos erupted. Loyal Praetorians clashed with conspirators. Some of the prisoners, realizing something had changed, fought to escape rather than wait for slaughter. Others huddled in terror, unsure what new horror this represented. Marcus pressed his attack, driving Commodus back, but the emperor was laughing. "Did you think I didn't know? Faithful Lucius told me everything. Your conspiracy dies today, Gladiator." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Marcus risked a glance and saw Lucius cutting down a fellow conspirator. Betrayal, again. But no, Lucius met his eyes and shouted, "The girl! Save the girl!" Understanding crashed over Marcus. Lucius hadn't betrayed them. He'd infiltrated deeper, learned Commodus's counterplans. The prisoners weren't random. They were families of suspected conspirators. The girl and her brother were Claudia's children. This wasn't just a massacre, it was a trap to destroy the resistance entirely. With renewed fury, Marcus attacked. His blade found gaps in Commodus's defense, drawing blood that looked black in the arena's shadows. But the emperor had his own advantages. Guards racing to his aid, the high ground of his box, the manic strength of madness. "You're too late," Commodus laughed as screams erupted from the arena floor. "My loyal soldiers are already following their true orders." Marcus looked and saw with horror that some of the Roman soldiers were breaking ranks, not to help prisoners escape, but to begin the slaughter early. The conspiracy had been infiltrated on both sides, but the resistors fought back. Claudia herself appeared among the defenders, a concealed blade in her hand, cutting down false soldiers to reach her children. Gaius, who was supposed to stay hidden, emerged from a side entrance with freedmen guards, creating an escape route for prisoners. And Livia, Marcus's heart stopped as he saw her. Livia was in the arena itself, having somehow disguised herself among the prisoners to help coordinate the escape from within. "No," Marcus roared, but he couldn't abandon his fight with Commodus. The emperor had to die, or this would all be for nothing. He pressed harder, accepting wounds to deliver his own. Blood, his and Commodus's, made the floor treacherous. Below, the arena had become a true battlefield. No more performance, just desperate people fighting for survival. Some prisoners made it to Gaius's escape route. Others fell beneath swords. The crowd, initially excited by unexpected drama, began to panic as violence spread beyond the sandy floor. Commodus, seeing his grand spectacle collapse into chaos, fought with increasing desperation. "I am a god," he screamed. "You cannot kill a god." Marcus, bleeding from multiple wounds, found strength in thoughts of all who died for this madman's entertainment. Julia and Quintus, who died while he was forced to perform, the countless victims of the arena. The innocents threatened today. "You're not a god," he growled. "You're just another man who needs to die." His blade found Commodus's heart. The emperor stared in shock, then fell, his blood mixing with the sand that had drunk so much over the centuries. But there was no time for satisfaction. Marcus turned to the arena, where the battle still raged. He saw Titus defending a group of children, his arena skills serving freedom instead of entertainment. He saw Claudia reaching her children, pulling them toward safety. He saw Lucius, openly fighting against loyal Praetorians now, buying time for escapes. And he saw Livia go down, a soldier's blade catching her shoulder. Marcus didn't remember crossing the space. One moment he was in the imperial box, the next he was beside his wife, his blade cutting through her attacker. She was alive but bleeding heavily. "Couldn't let you have all the glory," she gasped, managing a pained smile. Marcus lifted her, looking for escape routes, but more soldiers poured in, not just Praetorians, but urban cohorts, called to restore order. The conspiracy might have killed Commodus, but Rome's machinery of control ground on. "Get her out!" Gaius appeared, supported by 2 freedmen. "The passage is still open." Together, they fought their way toward escape. Marcus carried Livia, while Gaius, showing surprising skill with a blade, guarded their backs. They joined a stream of fleeing prisoners and conspirators, racing through tunnels beneath the arena. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew fainter, but no less desperate. They emerged in a warehouse district, where Claudia's people had wagons waiting. As they loaded wounded onto transports, Lucius appeared, supporting a wounded Titus. "The emperor is dead," he reported, "but the Praetorians are split. Some support us, others fight for their own advantage. The city will tear itself apart. Then we leave," Claudia decided. "Regroup outside Rome. Let the Senate sort through the chaos." As wagons rolled toward the city gates, Marcus held Livia, pressing cloth to her wound. She was pale but conscious, her eyes finding his. "Did we win?" she asked. Marcus looked back.